Amidst the splendor of Baghdad, during the heyday of Islamic civilization, lived a man named Ahmad ibn Fadlan. He was a respected envoy of the palace due to his eloquence and writing skills. However, a small mistake changed his entire destiny, resulting in him being sent as an ambassador to a region far to the north. The long journey across the desert and barren fields took them to the borders of an unknown world. At the riverbank, they saw a group of giant men with long hair, thick beards, and boats covered in strange symbols. They were a northern tribe, the Vikings, who would later change the entire course of Ahmad ibn Fadlan's life. Accompanied by his only loyal friend, Melchizedek, they tried to introduce themselves politely, but the Vikings looked at them suspiciously. They did not understand Ahmad's language, and Ahmad did not understand a single word they said.
Noster Rex, Tabernacle. He says their king is out there.
Shortly thereafter, someone appeared, his gaze sharp, full of curiosity. It was Buliweef, the leader, a warrior who was even respected by his own people. Through an interpreter, Ahmad explained his purpose as an envoy from a distant land. Suddenly, a messenger from a remote village arrived in a hurry with a message. He spoke in their language, quickly, nervously, and anxiously. From the tone of his voice alone, it was clear that something terrible had happened.
They are menaced by an ancient evil, a terror that has no name.
Buliweef stared intently, then called over an old woman dressed in a black robe, a fortune teller, their tribe's shaman. The woman knelt before the bonfire, burning herbs and muttering words that Ahmad did not understand. In the silence, the shaman delivered her prophecy. 12 warriors must set out north to fight an ancient evil that was rising, and the 13th warrior must be a stranger. All heads turned to Ahmad. He, the poet from Baghdad, was now part of a destiny he did not even understand.
The hell are you saying?
His face was shocked, Melchizedek tried to argue, but the decision had been made. No one could refuse the command of the gods in their eyes. At dawn, the Vikings prepared their horses. Ahmad was confused by the size of their horses, which were small but sturdy, very different from the elegant, tall Arabian horses. The Vikings laughed at him as he struggled to mount his saddle. To them, Ahmad was nothing but a burden, a delicate man who had somehow been forced to get involved in the affairs of the gods. But the journey began nonetheless. They crossed vast plains, traversed dark forests, and rivers whose waters were as cold as death. The rough laughter of the Viking warriors was now replaced by a long silence. This journey was not just a mission. It was a journey into a fear that even they themselves could not explain. That night, they slept on the ground without blankets, just staring at the sky and talking about the war they had won. Ahmad felt small, weak, and completely alienated in the midst of this brutal world. But something began to change. He observed them. He studied their language, their body language, the way they thought. Ahmad began to understand one word, then two, then sentences.
So kommer det bästa. Nå han vill gå.
We can find some geese.
For I will get to know supper when I come home tonight.
My mother, a noble family.
This meant that he was no longer just an observer. Slowly, he began to enter their world. After a long journey through forests, valleys, and cold storms from the north, Ahmad and his 12 Viking warriors finally arrived at a remote village. But it wasn't a warm welcome that awaited them, rather, a terrifying silence. The villagers live in real fear. Their eyes are dull, their bodies tired, and their faces full of fear. Even the village soldiers, usually brave, now look like shadows of their former selves. They are not only fighting the enemy, they are fighting something they cannot even explain. The bodies were found at the edge of the forest. Their bodies were torn apart, their flesh gone, their bones broken as if chewed. All that remained were teeth marks and claw marks like those of an animal. Not a human. The villagers called it Wendell, an ancient creature from legend, a human flesh-eater, a worshipper of darkness.
Great sight!
They were afoot.
The Vikings refused to believe it completely. For them, there was no creature that could not be fought with a sword.
And there's more.
But the first night proved this was no ordinary enemy. As darkness fell, thick fog enveloped the village. Bonfires burned, but they couldn't dispel the cold that crept in. All the soldiers stood guard, swords drawn, eyes alert, breath held. Until suddenly, a scream was heard from the corner of the village. Large shadows moved quickly in the fog, as if merging with the darkness. The Wendells attacked. They came like a storm, unseen but deadly. The Vikings fought back, but the enemy moved too fast, too wildly. And as quickly as he had come, Wendell disappeared back into the fog, leaving behind a village covered in blood, fire, and corpses. The warriors fell silent. They had won. But it was not a victory, because now they knew. This enemy was not only powerful, this enemy hunted like an animal and thought like a human. That night, one thing became clear. This was not just a war against wild creatures. This was a war against a legend that had come to destroy all of humanity, one village at a time.
Their blood looks real enough.
This one of the claws.
We have defenses to build.
The next morning, the Viking warriors gathered in the wooden hall. There, Bullawif stood as their leader. He knew that courage without strategy was just another way to die quickly. Together with the other soldiers, he began to devise a defense plan. The wooden walls were reinforced. Trenches were dug, because in Wendell's eyes, all humans were meat. But as the sun set, the mysterious drumming could be heard again from afar, like a giant heart beating in the forest.
Look at her.
Everyone looked north. They knew what it meant. Wendell was coming again, and this time, with even greater force. Night was falling. Torches were lit. Swords were drawn from their sheaths. There were no more whispers. There were no more complaints. In their hearts, there were only two choices: survive or die with the weak. And for the first time, Ahmad stood shoulder to shoulder with the Vikings, not as a stranger, but as the 13th warrior, who now wielded a sword not because fate had brought him there. Then from the darkness, hundreds of Wendell moved like wild animals. The battle broke out. Screams filled the air. Ahmad fought in the middle of the formation. His hands trembled at first, but his body moved instinctively. Every swing of his sword was a choice between life and death. Meanwhile, the village was in chaos. The women screamed. Wendell came, killed, then disappeared into the fog, like a ghost that could not be pursued. The soldiers were exhausted. Some had been lost, and when all was quiet, there was only one thing more painful than the enemy's swords: the realization that Wendell would come again, and stronger. The morning after the second attack, the village was transformed into a sea of wounds and sorrow. People buried their families. The soldiers held back their anger, not out of fear, but because they knew anger alone would not be enough to win this war. In that situation, the soldiers went to an old shaman. He sprinkled ashes on the bonfire, muttering spells in an ancient language that even the Vikings themselves did not fully understand. And the shaman spoke. You cannot win, as long as the source of Wendell's power is still alive. There is a woman, a queen, the mother of the bear hunters. As long as she breathes, Wendell will always return. The shaman gave one last piece of advice. Queen Wendell lives deep inside a hidden stone cave in a misty valley. Only a small army can reach her, because anyone who comes in large numbers will die before reaching the gate. They prepared to enter a darkness that even Viking warriors were unaccustomed to facing. Their mission was not to fight. Their mission was to kill a legend.
The next glen. Many fires.
Is there a cave?
The small team led by Bullywheef moved quietly, leaving behind the hopes of the people who entrusted their lives to these 13 soldiers. Ahmad, who used to be just a poet and diplomat, now walks alongside the hunters of death. After that, they finally arrived at the mouth of a giant cave, like the jaws of an ancient creature ready to swallow anyone who dared to enter. Inside, there was a rumbling sound, not the sound of water, but the sound of breathing and the growling of living creatures, dozens, maybe hundreds. They descended the steep stone wall, passing through a passageway lit only by flickering torches, a room filled with skulls, bones, animal skins, all of which showed that the Wendel were not mere humans. They were a flesh-eating cult that thrived on fear.
I was wrong.
And at the deepest end of the cave, they saw her. Queen Wendel. Her body was painted blood red, sitting on a throne of skulls, her eyes empty yet full of invisible power. She was the root of all terror. She was the one who had given them the strength to live like animals and kill like demons. Bullywheef slowly approached. With one swift swing, his sword pierced the queen's chest. The world seemed to stop. But Bullywheef was struck by a deadly poison from the claws of the demon queen. Then everything broke. Wendel's screams echoed through the cave, a terrible rage. They knew their queen was dead, and now there was only revenge. The Vikings had no time to celebrate their small victory. They had to get out, or die, trapped in the enemy's lair. The narrow corridors turned into hell. They ran, diving into the underground river, fighting the strong current with barely any breath left. That morning, after the slaughter of the Queen of Darkness was complete, the sky was quiet. Bullywheef, his body weakened by the deadly poison, refused to die before the war was over. The soldiers returned to the village, bringing news that Queen Wendel had been killed. However, they knew something. If the queen was dead, then Wendel would come, no longer to hunt, but to take revenge. In the distance, the fog moves, not because of the wind, but because hundreds of Wendels are coming like a storm. The Vikings formed their formation. Wooden shields were arranged, spears were planted, swords were raised. They no longer attack secretly. They come directly, in broad daylight, without fear, without disguise, because this war is no longer about food. It's about tribal honor. It's about anger. And amid the chaos, Wendel, the leader, appeared, holding the staff of death. Bullywheef stepped forward. Even though the poison still burned inside him, even though his body was barely able to stand, he still moved forward. Because a king does not wait for destiny. He goes out and finds it.
Sisters and my brothers.
When finally the Wendel charged, the earth shook beneath their feet. Wild cries filled the air, and the sound of metal meeting flesh swept through the village. The battle raged brutally. Bodies lay scattered. Shields were broken. Breathing was heavy. The cries of death were no longer heard, because everyone was too busy trying to stay alive. In a brief duel that felt like a battle between gods and demons, Bullywheef stabbed the Wendel leader right in the chest, destroying their spirit. They retreated. The fog swallowed them back up. The forest returned them to darkness. The war was over. Bullywheef sat down, breathing heavily, but his face was calm. He did not die of illness. He died as a soldier born to fight, and chose his own death. When morning came, he knew his journey with the Vikings was over, but their story would live on within him. The ship was ready. He boarded, looking back at the village that now felt like a home he would never live in again.
Goodbye, Northman.